Growing up in the green expanse of Oregon, I had always dreamed of trading the endless drizzle for sunnier climes. So, when the opportunity arose to move across the country to Florida with my boyfriend, I leapt at the chance. I imagined myself lounging on white sandy beaches and gallivanting around the magical realms of Disney. However, reality struck like a wet rag to the face when I realized my new home would be far from the picture postcard scenes I had envisioned. Instead of palm-fringed beaches, I landed in Hawthorne, a tiny speck just outside of Gainesville, a place where the wilderness reclaimed old dirt roads and insects reigned supreme. Hawthorne was as small town as it gets. Imagine a single stoplight orchestrating the sparse traffic, surrounded by exactly 4 commercial establishments: Dollar General, Steve's Market, E's Pharmacy, and Sonny's Barbecue, the epicenter of excitement for locals. Not long after settling in, I managed to get a job at Eckerd's, the only general store in town, conveniently sandwiched next to Steve's Market. I had been working at Eckerd's for about 3 months, gradually getting used to the laid-back pace and quirky residents of Hawthorne, when a peculiar incident unfolded. One morning, as I walked in to start my shift, my manager, a usually unflappable man named Ron, pulled me aside into his cramped office. The desk was cluttered with what looked like a mountain of mail, none of it ordinary business correspondence. Spread out before me were 30 to 40 envelopes, all different sizes and colors, but with one thing in common. They were all addressed to me by hand. "Do you know this person?" Ron asked, his brow furrowed as he gestured to the pile. I shook my head, picking up a cheerful yellow envelope at his prompting. Inside, I found 2 handwritten letters and a magazine cutout of a woman with long blonde hair, eerily similar to my own. As Ron watched, I skimmed through the letters, my stomach churning. The contents were deeply unsettling. Vivid fantasies about spending time with me, many of them overtly sexual. The writer described washing my hair, the scent of it, and bizarre references to moonlit nights. Certain phrases were highlighted, others underlined. My first panic thought was, am I getting fired? But the situation was far more complex. "Do you know a guy named David Elrod?" Ron pressed, his voice steady but concerned. "David? The tall, lanky guy with thick glasses and frizzy hair, who comes in for Diet Coke and medication?" I replied, an image of the man forming immediately in my mind. He was a regular customer, socially awkward, which I attributed to either shyness or some mild social disability. He was harmless, I had thought, despite sometimes lingering around my register a bit too long. 2 weeks prior, there had been an incident where he touched my hair. It was strange but didn't feel threatening. I had brushed it off as one of the many oddities of retail work. However, with the letters laid out in front of me, a cold realization washed over. Ron informed me that David would be banned from Eckerd's and that I should go home for the day while they figured out how to handle the situation. Confused and anxious, I left, my mind reeling with the morning's revelations. The day took an even stranger turn a few hours later. As I was trying to process everything at home, there was a knock at the door. Peering out, I was met with the surreal sight of what appeared to be a SWAT team. Opening the door, I was greeted by 2 police officers, a female officer stepping forward with a few of the letters in her hand. "Can we come in and talk to you about these?" she asked, her tone serious. Inside, the officer explained that the police had been attempting to serve David with a trespassing notice when they had a disturbing encounter. David had insisted that there was a misunderstanding, that I wanted to talk to him, becoming increasingly agitated and combative. They decided to pursue stalking charges based on his behavior and the letters. "You need to be aware," she continued gravely, that David killed and partially dismembered his mother when he was 12. He was released from a juvenile psychiatric facility less than 4 years ago. The room spun as she spoke. My boyfriend, listening in from the doorway, looked furious and confused. The officers detailed how they found disturbing materials at David's house, confirming that he had been fixating on me in a dangerously obsessive way. David was arrested the next day outside Eckert's. The full scope of his delusions about our relationship and his plans were locked away with the letters, entered into evidence before I could fully understand the gravity of what had been directed at me. The aftermath was messy and painful, feeling exposed and frightened, and with my relationship strained by the events, I decided to leave Florida. Within a week, I was back in Oregon, trying to regain some sense of normalcy after the harrowing experience. No amount of sunshine or adventure could make me stay in a place where I had felt so threatened. Returning to Oregon was like stepping back into a familiar, comforting blanket that enveloped me with its cool, damp air and the familiar rustling of pine trees. It was the complete opposite of Florida's muggy heat and the eerie quiet of Hawthorne's swamp-surrounded silence. I needed this familiar comfort. I needed to heal and to put as much distance as I could between myself and the terrifying experience I had just endured. My first few weeks back were a blur of reconnecting with old friends and revisiting my favorite haunts, places that seemed to wash away the lingering fears that followed me from Florida. I took long hikes in the lush forests around my hometown, the green and vibrant landscapes grounding me and helping to quiet the anxiety that buzzed incessantly at the back of my mind. Despite the tranquility of my surroundings, sleep was elusive. Every small sound at night sent a rush of adrenaline through me, and shadows in the corner of my room morphed into ominous figures. I realized I needed professional help to deal with the trauma and began seeing a therapist specializing in anxiety and post-traumatic stress. These sessions became my sanctuary, a place where I could unpack the layers of fear and confusion I felt. Through therapy, I began to understand how deeply the incident had affected me and learned strategies to manage my anxiety and reclaim my sense of safety. As I worked on healing internally, I also took proactive steps to ensure my own security. I moved into a new apartment with better security features, attended a self-defense class, and became more vigilant about my personal information and privacy. These weren't just precautionary measures. They were essential steps that brought back a sense of control over my life. Gradually, I started to feel like myself again. I rekindled my interest in photography, a hobby I had neglected in the chaos of my move to Florida and the subsequent turmoil. Capturing the beauty of the Pacific Northwest through my lens was therapeutic. It reminded me of the resilience of nature and, by extension, my own resilience. I shared my photos online and connected with a community of photographers who appreciated the raw, untouched splendor of the landscapes I loved so much. As the months passed, my confidence grew. The fear that had once threatened to overshadow my thoughts began to recede. I was no longer jumping at shadows, nor was I haunted by the thought of David. It was during this time of personal growth and rediscovery that I met Alex at a local photography exhibition. Alex, with a warm smile and an easygoing attitude, was refreshingly open and shared my love for the outdoors. We connected over our mutual appreciation for art and nature, and as our friendship deepened, I found myself opening up about my past experiences. Alex's empathy and understanding were healing in their own way. There was no judgment, only support, and a willingness to listen. A stark contrast to the isolation I had felt during the ordeal with David. Our relationship blossomed naturally, grounded in shared interests and mutual respect. With Alex, I felt safe and valued. a far cry from the fear and vulnerability I had experienced in Florida. It was a testament to the fact that with the right support and a lot of inner work, it was possible to move past trauma and build something beautiful and lasting. As I look back on those tumultuous times, I'm struck by the journey I've undergone. From the fearful, uncertain young woman who fled Florida to the stronger, more assured person I am today. The ordeal with David, while terrifying, forced me to confront my vulnerabilities and fears head-on. It led me to seek help, to strengthen myself, and eventually to open my heart again in a way I hadn't thought possible. Life is unpredictable, and often, the darkest times lead to periods of significant personal growth and transformation. I learned that it's not just about surviving. It's about learning how to thrive in the aftermath, about finding joy and beauty in the wake of fear, and about the strength that comes from facing the past head-on. My move back to Oregon wasn't just a retreat. It was a reset, a chance to start anew on my own terms, in a place that felt like home. My venture into the world of online dating started out innocently enough. With the swipe of a finger on Tinder, I connected with Emily. She was witty, shared my love for indie films, and our text conversations flowed effortlessly. After about a week of chatting, Emily suggested we meet in person. The idea thrilled me. I was eager to see if our online chemistry translated into the real world. She chose a quaint coffee shop downtown for our rendezvous, a public spot that promised a relaxed atmosphere for our first face-to-face meeting. However, the morning of our planned date, a series of messages from Emily abruptly changed everything. With a heavy tone, she confessed that the photos on her profile weren't actually of her. And more shockingly, she revealed she was not a woman, but a man named Eric. He pleaded with me, saying how much he enjoyed our conversations and begged me to still meet him despite the deception. I felt a mix of betrayal and confusion. Trust was already broken. I politely declined, blocked his profile, and tried to move past the disappointment. Determined not to let this setback keep me down, I jumped back into the Tinder pool about a week later. That's when I met Sarah. She was vibrant and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. Our chats were filled with laughter and shared stories. When she asked if I frequently talked to people on Tinder, I made the mistake of recounting my recent odd encounter with Eric. Surprisingly, she was sympathetic and didn't judge. Feeling a connection, she suggested we meet, and I agreed, insisting it be in a public setting once more. We decided on the same cafe where I was supposed to meet Emily. Maybe I was trying to overwrite the bad memory with something better. The next day, I arrived early, found a cozy table by the window, and waited. The clock ticked past our meeting time, 5:10. 15 minutes later, there was still no sign of Sarah. Trying to quell my rising anxiety, I scanned the street outside. That's when I noticed him. A man across the street staring intently at me through the cafe window. Our eyes met, and a chill ran down my spine. I looked away, hoping I was just being paranoid, but when I glanced back, he was still there, his gaze unwavering. Feeling a growing sense of danger, I didn't wait around to see what would happen next. I grabbed my jacket, rushed out of the cafe, hopped on my bike, and pedaled home as fast as I could. Once safe in my apartment, I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe not. But with my nerves frayed, I deleted my Tinder profile, hoping to cut off any connection to what was increasingly feeling like a dangerous game. For a few weeks, life returned to normal, or so I thought. Then, the phone calls began. Unknown numbers appeared on my phone, and when I answered the first few, all I heard was heavy breathing on the other end. My heart raced. The calls were creepy, and I soon refused to answer any number I didn't recognize. Then the text messages started, innocuous at first, then increasingly persistent and unsettling. They began begging for a meeting, then escalated into sexually explicit messages, and finally, threats started pouring in. The harasser knew things they shouldn't. Names of my family members, addresses, personal details that made my blood run cold. They claimed they would involve my loved ones if I didn't respond. The phone number associated with the texts was untraceable, adding another layer of helplessness to my growing despair. I held out for 2 weeks, ignoring the barrage of communications in hopes that the tormentor would tire of their twisted game. But the situation only worsened. Each morning I awoke to a flood of vile texts, and the phone calls became a near-constant interruption. Driven to my breaking point, I decided to change my phone number, clinging to the hope that it would end the nightmare. For a brief period, the silence was blissful, and I believed I had regained control. But it was short-lived. The harassment resumed with renewed intensity, and my sense of security shattered once more. My phone provider confirmed they hadn't disclosed my new number, which only deepened the mystery and my anxiety. Then, as if things couldn't get any worse, I found myself locked out of my Facebook account. Friends began contacting me, alarmed by aggressive and hurtful messages being sent from my profile. One message in particular, targeted at a close friend regarding her deceased mother, crossed a line I didn't know existed. Frustrated and frightened, I reached out to Facebook's support team, explained my predicament, and regained access to my account, only to deactivate it immediately after. This digital violation was the last straw. I filed a report with the FBI, detailing the events that had tormented me for over a month. Although they documented everything, they were clear that without immediate danger, their hands were tied. Feeling utterly isolated and vulnerable, I considered hiring a private investigator or even a hacker to track down the perpetrator. However, fearing further escalation or legal repercussions, I decided against it. I hoped that by continuing to ignore the harasser, they would eventually lose interest. I maintained a low profile online, kept my Facebook deactivated, and braced myself each time my phone buzzed with a new notification. The psychological toll was immense. I struggled to focus at work, my social life deteriorated, and I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, distrusting even familiar faces. As months dragged on, the frequency of the messages and calls finally began to decrease. Now, they arrived sporadically, a cruel reminder of the ordeal that upended my life. The fear has somewhat subsided, but the scars remain, making every new text or call a potential trigger. I've sworn off online dating, too scarred by the past to consider exposing myself to similar risks again. As the year draws to a close, I'm preparing to move, longing for a fresh start in a new city. My advice to anyone considering online dating is simple. Be vigilant, protect your personal information, and always meet in safe, public places. What happened to me was a stark reminder of the dark corners of the digital world, where anonymity empowers the worst of human behavior. I learned my lesson the hard way, and I hope my story can prevent others from enduring the same nightmare. As the year progressed and the harassment slowly receded into the background of my daily life, the impact of what had happened continued to resonate deeply. The ease with which my sense of security was shattered and the lingering paranoia that followed were not easily shaken. The frequent glances over my shoulder became a part of my routine, and the sound of my phone alerting to a message often sent a jolt of anxiety through me. Despite this, I began to take small steps to reclaim the normalcy that had been stripped away from me. I reconnected with friends, many of whom had been unwittingly dragged into this mess through the malicious messages sent from my hacked Facebook account. I apologized profusely for any distress caused and explained the situation in detail. Their support was overwhelming, providing a much-needed reminder of the good that still existed around me. Their understanding and solidarity helped me feel less isolated, less victimized. I also threw myself into work, finding that immersing myself in projects and deadlines provided a distraction from the lingering effects of the harassment. My colleagues noticed a change in me, a more driven and focused demeanor, perhaps a byproduct of my need to exert control over some aspect of my life when so much of it felt governed by fear and uncertainty. However, despite these efforts, reminders of the ordeal would occasionally surface. An unexpected text message one evening, sparse as they had become, was enough to unravel the sense of calm I had carefully constructed. Each message felt like a cold hand reaching out from my past, reminding me of the vulnerability I had experienced. It was a stark contrast to the anonymity I once enjoyed, now pierced by the reality that someone out there still sought to cause me distress. The decision to move became more than just a desire for a fresh start. It felt necessary for my mental health. The thought of leaving behind the physical reminders of this chapter of my life was liberating. I began packing my belongings, each box filled not just with household items, but with the heavy weight of the past year's events. The process was cathartic, and as I labeled each box, I felt a piece of the burden lift. I was meticulous about maintaining my privacy during the move. Only a select few people knew my new address, and I made changes to how I shared information online, tightening security settings, and being more selective about whom I trusted. I was determined not to repeat the same mistakes that had led me into such turmoil. The move itself was uneventful, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous months. My new apartment was in a bustling neighborhood that promised anonymity amongst the crowd, a place where I could blend in and hopefully find peace. The fresh walls, unmarked by the past, were like a blank canvas on which I could start anew, free from the shadows that had followed me. Settling into my new environment, I found comfort in the routines of daily life, enjoying simple pleasures like morning runs in the nearby park and evenings spent exploring local eateries. The more I engaged with my new community, the more I felt anchored to the present, my fears slowly being replaced by new memories and experiences. However, I remained cautious, always aware that the digital footprint I had left behind could never be completely erased. I continued to avoid dating apps, instead choosing to meet new people through community events and mutual friends. It was slower, yes, but it felt safer, more genuine. Months passed, and the frequency of unsettling incidents continued to decrease. The occasional message still arrived, but they no longer held the same power over me. I had built a new life, surrounded by people who knew my story and supported me through it. Reflecting on the journey, I realized how much I had changed. The ordeal had taught me about resilience, the importance of community, and the strength found in vulnerability. I had emerged from the experience more aware of the risks associated with our digital lives, but also more equipped to face them. As I looked ahead, I felt a cautious optimism. I had survived, adapted, and grown. The scars remained, a testament to my ordeal, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they were reminders of what I had overcome and the lessons I had learned. The future was uncertain, as it always is, but I faced it with a new sense of strength and clarity. And so, as I settled into my new home, I allowed myself to hope, to plan, and to dream again, grateful for the chance to start over, mindful of the past but not bound by it. This new chapter was mine to write, and I approached it with a heart fortified by experience and a spirit eager to embrace whatever lay ahead. The year was 2005, and my life at 19 was unfolding in an unpredictable dance of freedom and fear. I had just graduated from college, a period brimming with late-night study sessions and even later nights with friends. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was an apartment, a place I called home for the last semester, hanging on the edge of the college town of Pine Ridge. My apartment lease stretched a few weeks past graduation, and despite the advice of practically everyone, I decided to stick it out until the end. Big mistake. The layout of my apartment was typical, but let me paint the picture for you. You'd walk through the front door, greeted immediately by a flight of stairs leading up to the main floor. Reaching the top, you'd find yourself in the living room, the heart of my small world, with a clear view of the balcony door directly ahead. On one seemingly ordinary night, my life took a twist. I had just purchased a new car, a Freedom on 4 wheels. As light snowflakes began to drift from the evening sky, I stood on the balcony, flipping through the car's owner's manual while chatting with my mom on the phone. Suddenly, a warm gust scented with the sharp sting of whiskey cut through the cold, causing me to shiver. I turned, and there he was, an unfamiliar face leaning over the wooden divider that separated my balcony from my elderly neighbors, the Thompsons. Startled, I nearly dropped my phone, managing to stutter out a hasty goodbye to my mom. "Hey, I'm Jake," the man said, extending a hand as if we were meeting in a normal setting. The awkwardness settled like thick fog between us. Hi," I managed to reply, my voice a mix of confusion and surprise. "So, what are you doing out here in the cold?" he asked casually, as if intruding on neighbors was a nightly routine. "Oh, just reading a book," I said, forcing a smile that I hoped looked convincing. Just as abruptly as he had appeared, he disappeared back to the other side of the divider. I retreated inside, shaken by the encounter, deciding that the night had ended for any more outdoor adventures. The next day unfolded with the routine of a typical post-grad day. As I headed out to grab the mail, a piece of paper caught my eye, sticking out boldly from my mailbox. Unfolding it, I read the words that made my heart sink. "You are very beautiful. Can I take you out on a date?" It was signed, Jake. Confusion and a creeping fear took hold as I placed the note on my kitchen counter. Who was this Jake, and what did he want from me? That night, tranquility was shattered by the sounds of an intense argument coming from the Thompsons' apartment. The voices were loud, angry, punctuated by a chilling threat from Jake. "I'll slit your throat." My entire body froze. What had I gotten myself into by staying here? The sounds of their sliding door slamming and footsteps on the balcony reignited my fears. The familiar, unwelcome scent of cigarettes and whiskey seeped through the walls. Despite the tension, exhaustion eventually pulled me into sleep, but peace was short-lived. A sudden noise woke me in the middle of the night. Heart pounding, I made my way toward the bathroom, only to be stopped cold by a harsh, frightening command. "Get back in bed, Birdie." The fact that he used a nickname, as if familiar, as if there was some twisted bond between us, sent a chill deeper than the winter night through me. Fleeing to the safety of my bathroom, I waited out the fear that clutched at my chest. When I dared to venture out, I sprinted back to my room, the echoes of his voice haunting the dark, silent spaces of my apartment. Morning couldn't come soon enough, and with the first light, I felt the cold again. But this time, it was real and physical. My eyes snapped open to the alarming sight of my balcony door wide open, a blatant reminder of my vulnerability. Another note lay on the counter, this one longer, more insistent, more delusional about a date. P.S. I promise you won't regret it, it concluded. That day was a blur of paranoia. Every sound made me jump, every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Later that evening, the pounding began again. This time on the walls of the hallway, the pounding of someone determined, desperate, or deranged. My mom's voice over the phone was a lifeline, advising me not to engage. I stood frozen by the door, terror overtaking me as his demands echoed through the thin barrier. When the noise finally ceased, I dared to move back towards my living room, only to freeze again. There he was, Jake, the source of all my recent fears, standing right there in the middle of my living room. His presence was a stark violation of the sanctuary I thought I had. "Why didn't you answer the door?" he asked, his tone cold, unsettling. "I was in the shower," I lied, my voice quivering despite my attempt to sound unaffected. He stared for a moment longer, an unreadable expression on his face, then turned and climbed back over the balcony divider. Just like that, he was gone. Relief washed over me in an icy wave, but the fear lingered, a constant companion that refused to leave. A week later, my lease finally ended. It felt like an eternity had passed since I'd first moved in. I spoke with my landlord, eager to leave behind the apartment and its haunting memories. That's when I learned Jake wasn't even supposed to be there. The Thompsons had violated their lease by having him stay as a third occupant. I moved everything out within days, desperate to start fresh somewhere, anywhere else. About a month into my new beginning, free from the shadows of Pine Ridge, my former landlord called with unsettling news. A young couple had moved into my old apartment, and Jake had broken in several times, his actions escalating to smashing their windows. It was a chilling confirmation of the danger he posed. Reflecting on those days from the safety of distance and time, I realized how close I had come to a potentially disastrous situation. Jake's unpredictable behavior was a stark reminder of the fragility of security and the importance of listening to those gut feelings of danger. Now, years later, I often find myself revisiting those tense weeks and conversations, using my experience as a cautionary tale. It's a story that underscores the sometimes hidden threats that can lurk in unsuspecting places and the resilience it takes to confront and overcome them. To that random man named Jake, whose presence turned my life into a series of frightened nights and anxious days, I hope we never meet again. My journey since then has been one of healing and learning, a process of reinforcing boundaries and cherishing the peace I now hold dear. Life continued, with its ups and downs, but the lessons from that time remain clear. The importance of trusting one's instincts, the value of security, and the profound impact of seemingly small decisions like staying in an apartment for a few extra weeks. Each choice we make weaves into the fabric of our lives, sometimes leading us into stories we never expected to live. For anyone listening, remember that sometimes the dangers we ignore in favor of convenience or denial can bring about the most profound changes, not just in our environments, but in the very essence of how we see the world and protect our peace. Always heed the warnings your mind and body give you, and never underestimate the power of a fresh start, away from the shadows of past fears.